We need to get Carol to sign those papers before she figures out how much this stuff is actually worth. When I heard my husband, Edward, say that, my heart completely stopped. Edward and my daughter-in-law, Monica, were speaking in low tones in the kitchen, believing I was still at Attorney Miller's office. But I had come home early, carrying the best news of my life in the envelope, now trembling in my hands. 2 hours earlier, I had been sitting across Attorney Miller's mahogany desk, unable to believe what I was hearing. Your uncle, Robert, left you 3 condos in downtown Atlanta and a beach house in Naples, Florida, Mrs. Vance. This is a substantial inheritance. I had signed the initial documents, but the full process would take a few more weeks. Robert had always been my favorite uncle, my mother's younger brother who never married or had children. He worked his whole life as an accountant, lived modestly in a simple apartment, and I had always thought he'd passed away with little more than a few savings bonds. When they called me a month ago to inform me of his passing, I cried for days. He was the last real link to my mother, who had died 10 years ago. The transfer process will take approximately 1 month, the attorney had explained. But I wanted to inform you now so you can begin planning. I walked out of that office feeling like destiny was finally smiling on me for the first time in years. I imagined telling Edward, David, and even Monica. Maybe this good news would bring us closer as a family. How naive I had been. Now standing in the hallway of my own home like an intruder, I listened as my husband of 30 years conspired with the woman who had joined our family 6 years ago when she married our son, David. The attorney said the properties are in Carol's name exclusively, Edward continued, using that calculated, smooth voice he reserved for his toughest clients. But if we get her to sign the power of attorney I drafted, we can handle the sales without complications. And if she refuses? Monica's voice sounded anxious. She won't refuse. Carol has always been too trusting for her own good. Edward dismissed. We'll tell her it's for tax reasons, that we need to act fast to avoid high inheritance taxes. I pressed a hand to my chest, my heart beating so loudly I was sure they could hear it in the kitchen. Too trusting for my own good. For years, I had been the one keeping this family afloat, lending money when David needed it for his startup, never asking questions when Edward came home late from work. Your mother-in-law isn't stupid, but she doesn't understand complex finances, Monica chimed in. What if she starts asking questions about the rush? Then we'll have to be more convincing. Edward's tone chilled me to the bone. Ultimately, it's for the whole family's benefit. In 30 years of marriage, I had never heard him speak like this. Cold, calculating, as if I were an obstacle instead of his wife. I slowly backed up toward the front door, careful not to make a sound. My hands were still trembling as I opened the main door and gently closed it, pretending I had just arrived. I took a deep breath, slipped the envelope into my purse, and called out from the entryway, just as I always did. I'm home. Where is everybody? The movement in the kitchen stopped abruptly. I heard quick murmurs, then Edward's footsteps approaching. Carol, my love. He appeared in the hallway with a smile that now seemed utterly fake. How was the lawyer? Everything okay with Robert's papers? Monica appeared behind him, drying her hands with a dish rag, her expression carefully neutral. Fine, I lied, studying their faces, just some initial formalities. The process is going to take a few weeks. Edward exchanged a swift look with Monica. A few weeks? Didn't he tell you exactly what he left? There it was, the trap set, waiting for me to fall in like the overly trusting woman they believed me to be. Some properties, I said vaguely, walking toward the kitchen, but the attorney says there are a lot of complicated tax issues. Properties? Monica asked, trying to sound casually interested. A few condos and a house, but nothing too special. The lawyer warned me that inheritance taxes can be really high if they aren't handled correctly. I watched them relax slightly, believing I had already swallowed their prepared narrative. You know what? Edward said. Maybe you should let me help you with that. I have experience with tax matters. Yes, Monica quickly added. It would be awful if you lost money by not handling the paperwork right. I poured myself a glass of water, noticing how their eyes tracked my every movement. 30 years living with this man. 6 years living alongside this woman. And only now was I seeing their true faces. That's very kind of you, I finally said. But the attorney says I have time to decide. The procedures are slow. Carol, Edward said, moving closer to me. Sometimes in these cases, it's better to act fast. Things can get complicated if we wait too long. No rush, I insisted, observing his frustration start to show. I have at least a month before everything's ready. Of course, Monica said, but I could see her mentally calculating. We just want to make sure you have all the help you need. I know, I smiled sweetly. It's comforting to know I have family who cares so much about me. I went upstairs to my bedroom after excusing myself. I sat on the bed with the envelope in my hands. Inside, there was a personal letter from Robert that I hadn't had the courage to read at the attorney's office. I opened it with trembling hands. My dearest Carol, it began in his careful handwriting. If you are reading this, I hope it is because you can finally enjoy what I have left you. But knowing your family as I do, it is probably because they are already trying to convince you that you need help managing your inheritance. My uncle had predicted exactly what had just happened. Do not trust anyone, Carol, not even David. Especially do not trust Edward. I've been watching for years, and there are things you need to know. In my apartment, in the bedroom closet, there is a hidden box beneath the loose floorboard. Inside, you will find documents that will help you understand why I decided to leave everything to you alone and why I took so many precautions. A noise in the hallway made me quickly hide the letter. Footsteps were approaching my door. 3 soft knocks. Carol, are you okay? Edward's voice sounded concerned, but now I could hear the falseness behind every word. I'm fine, I replied. Just a little tired from all the paperwork. Would you like to talk a little about the next steps? The next steps, of course. Give me a moment, I said. I hid the letter in my purse, along with all the lawyer's documents. When I opened the door, Edward was there with that look of false concern I now recognize perfectly. My love, he said. I know this must be overwhelming. Inheritances can be very complicated. Yes, I agreed. Very complicated. That's why I thought maybe we should go to the lawyer together tomorrow to make sure you understand all the options. To make sure I signed whatever he wanted me to sign. The lawyer said I don't need to return until next week. I lied. He said I should take time to process all the information. I saw a flash of frustration cross his face before he managed to smile again. Of course. But Carol, do you promise me you won't make any major decisions without consulting me first? These things can be very delicate. I promise, I lied again. That night, after Edward fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, reviewing 30 years of marriage. How many other things had I overlooked? How many times had I believed his explanations without asking questions? But more importantly, what had Robert discovered that had led him to take such precautions? Tomorrow, I would go to my uncle's apartment. Tomorrow, I would discover the truth. And after that, I would decide exactly what I was going to do with that information. The next morning, Edward woke up in a strangely good mood. He was singing in the shower, whistling while he shaved, and even made me coffee without being asked. Good morning, my love. He kissed my forehead. Sleep well? Very well, I lied. I had spent most of the night awake, wondering what secrets Robert had uncovered. I thought we could have lunch together today, he said, adjusting his tie, to celebrate your inheritance. Even if it's modest, it's still a blessing. A modest blessing. He had already decided my inheritance wasn't a big deal, setting the stage for me to accept whatever help he offered. That sounds wonderful, I said, but I'm committed to running a few errands. What kind of errands? Bank stuff, some paperwork, I replied vaguely. You know, boring adult stuff. Edward frowned slightly. Don't you want me to come with you? I could help with any complicated paperwork. No need, I smiled. It's just routine signatures. After he left for work, I waited until I was sure he wouldn't come back. Then I headed to Robert's apartment. I had the keys from the funeral, but had never had a reason to use them until now. The apartment smelled of old books and the aftershave Robert had used for decades. Everything was exactly as I remembered it. Modest, clean, organized, nothing to suggest my uncle had owned valuable properties. I went straight to his bedroom and opened the closet. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, but when I moved some old boxes, I found the loose floorboard mentioned in his letter. It had a small, almost invisible cross carved into it. Beneath it was a metal box the size of a shoebox. Inside, I found things that completely changed my understanding of the last years of my life. First, financial documents showing that Robert had been lending money to my family for years. Edward had borrowed $150,000 over the past 4 years, always with promises to pay when he closed the next big deal. Then I found something that took my breath away, loan documents that David had signed, $75,000 over the last 3 years. But these documents had something different, Monica's signature as a co-signer. They knew. Both of them knew exactly where the money was coming from. But what truly made me tremble was what I found at the bottom of the box. Photographs. Edward leaving a hotel with a blonde woman who was definitely not me. The date was marked on the back, 8 months ago. More photos. The same two at a restaurant, laughing, holding hands, different dates. All from the last 2 years. There was a note taped to the photos, written in Robert's hand. Carol, I hired a detective a year ago when I saw them together downtown. His name is Jackson. His number is below. The rest of the evidence is in Naples at the house. Forgive me for not telling you while I was alive, but you needed to discover it yourself so you could decide what to do. Detective Jackson. Robert had hired a private investigator. With trembling hands, I dialed the number. Jackson speaking. A deep voice answered after the second ring. Detective, this is Carol Vance. Robert Morales left me your number. Mrs. Vance, his voice immediately softened. I was expecting your call. Did you find the box? Yes, I said, my voice barely a whisper. How long did Robert know? About a year. At first, he only suspected financial irregularities, but when he saw your husband with Patty Reynolds, he decided to investigate more deeply. Patty Reynolds. The woman in the photographs had a name. Is there more evidence? Much more, ma'am. Your uncle asked me to document everything, but not to show you until after his passing. He wanted you to decide for yourself what to do with the information. What kind of information? Detailed financial records, more photographs, documents showing your husband has been lying about his real income. And Mrs. Vance, there is information about your daughter-in-law as well. Monica, of course. Can we meet? I asked. Of course, but not somewhere your family might see you. Are you familiar with the Blue Moon Bistro downtown? Yes. Tomorrow at 10. Bring everything you found in the box. After hanging up, I sat on Robert's bed, surrounded by evidence of betrayals that had been happening right under my nose for years. My phone vibrated. A text from Edward. How are the errands going? Need help with anything? I replied. All good. Wrapping up in an hour. But the truth was, I had just started. I had just started to discover who my family really was. I carefully put everything back into my purse and locked up the apartment. On the way home, I stopped at a stationery store and bought a notebook. If I was going to uncover the full truth, I needed to document everything. That night at dinner, I observed Edward with new eyes. The way he avoided my gaze when talking about work, how he checked his phone more than usual, how his explanations about new clients sounded rehearsed. Everything good at work? I asked innocently. Yes, very good. In fact, I have an important meeting tomorrow afternoon. I might be late. An important meeting or a date with Patty? What kind of meeting? Potential clients from Raleigh, very promising. I nodded as I always had, but inside I was taking mental notes. Tomorrow, after my meeting with Jackson, I would know exactly what kind of meeting he had planned. Edward, I said as we were doing the dishes, do you remember when David needed money for his business 2 years ago? He tensed slightly. Yes, why? I'm curious how he got the loan. The banks were very strict back then. Well, he said slowly, I helped him connect with some contacts. Private lenders with better rates. Private lenders. What a sophisticated way to say your Uncle Robert. And how are the payments going? Fine, I assume. David is responsible with his commitments. Responsible. With commitments he didn't even know he'd made to his own great uncle. That night, after Edward fell asleep, I wrote everything I had discovered in my new notebook. The amounts of money, the dates of the photos, the lies I had detected in just one conversation. At the bottom of the page, I wrote, tomorrow, meeting with Jackson. Find out what else Robert knew. Decide what to do with all this information. I stayed up very late, planning questions for the detective, But the question that tormented me most didn't involve evidence or investigations. The question was, who was Carol Vance when she wasn't trying to be the perfect wife? Tomorrow, I would start to find out. The meeting with Detective Jackson changed everything I thought I knew about my life. He was a man in his 60s, gray-haired, with eyes that seemed to see through lies, with decades of experience. We met at a secluded table at the Blue Moon Bistro, and before I could even order coffee, he had spread a thick file in front of me. "Mrs. Vance," he began, "your uncle hired me a year ago with very specific instructions. Document everything, but don't contact you until after his death. He wanted you to decide for yourself what to do with this information." I opened the file and found more photographs of Edward with Patty, but these were different. They showed a clear temporal progression. Romantic dinners, trips to hotels, intimate moments that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. "The affair started 3 years ago," Jackson explained. "Your husband met Patty Reynolds at an insurance conference. She works in marketing for a competing firm." 3 years, I repeated, feeling as though I'd been punched. Yes, at first it was just professional encounters, but over the last 2 years it's become much more serious. Patty is pressuring your husband to divorce you, and he's been promising he will, but he always finds excuses. His problem is he's lied to her about his financial situation. Jackson pulled out another set of documents. "Your husband has told Patty you have substantial savings, that the house is paid off, that he has successful investments. None of that is true." He was right. Our house still had 15 years left on the mortgage, our savings were modest, and Edward's investments had lost money more times than they had gained. "And my daughter-in-law, what did you find about Monica?" The detective pulled out another section of the file. "Your daughter-in-law has compulsive spending problems. Clothes, shoes, beauty treatments, things the children don't need. She and David have racked up over $200,000 in credit card debt." $200,000? And that's not all. Monica has been withdrawing money from the children's college accounts to cover her spending, small amounts every month, thinking no one would notice. "But those accounts, I deposit money there every month." "I know. Your uncle knew too. It's all documented." I leaned back in my chair, feeling like the world was reeling around me. "Does David know about the children's accounts?" "That's a good question," Jackson said. "According to our investigations, David knows about Robert's loans, but he's lied to Monica about the source of the money. He told her it came from special bank contacts his father had secured." "So David knew the money came from Robert, but Monica didn't." "Exactly. Your son was protecting his wife's pride, but unwittingly he was enabling her to make dangerous financial decisions." "And the college accounts?" "Monica has power of attorney for emergency cases, a document you signed when the children were born. She's been using that authority to make small, consistent withdrawals." I vaguely recalled signing those papers years ago, when David had explained it was just in case something happened to them and someone needed emergency access for education. "How much have they taken?" "Approximately $60,000 in the last 2 years. $60,000 from my grandchildren's educational future, for shoes and clothes." "Mrs. Vance," Jackson continued, "there's something else you need to know about your inheritance." "What else?" "Your uncle didn't just leave you those 3 properties. It's true the legal transfer will take a few weeks, but the properties are worth far more than anyone imagines." He pulled out photographs of the buildings. "These condos are in areas that have significantly appreciated in recent years. The rental income is approximately $60,000 a month. $60,000 a month. That was more than Edward earned in his best months. And the beach house? Naples, exclusive area. Conservatively is worth between $3 and $4 million. $4 million. I was sitting across from evidence that my inheritance was worth several $1,000,000, while my family was planning to defraud me because they thought I was too dumb to handle it. "Why didn't Robert tell me anything while he was alive?" "Because he loved you," Jackson replied simply. "And because he knew that if he told you about your family's betrayals, you would have tried to fix everything instead of protecting yourself." He was right. If I had known about Edward's affair, I would have gone to couples therapy. If I had known about David's debts, I would have paid everything immediately. If I had known about Monica, I would have found excuses for her behavior. "Your uncle wanted you to have power," Jackson continued. Power to decide exactly how to manage these situations on your own terms. And what do you recommend now? That depends on you, ma'am. Do you want to confront them directly? Do you want to simply protect your interests, or do you want them to incriminate themselves? What do you mean, incriminate themselves? Jackson smiled, a smile that reminded me of Robert. Your uncle left very specific instructions for that possibility. If you wish, we can get your family to reveal exactly how far they are willing to go to steal your inheritance. How? You go home today and tell them you've decided to accept Edward's help managing the inheritance, that you want to sign the power of attorney tomorrow, but first you want to celebrate as a family. Invite them all to Naples this weekend to see the beach house and have a small family gathering before signing the documents. And then you will see exactly what kind of people they truly are, and you will have all the evidence you need to decide how you want to proceed. I was silent, processing everything. In 1 hour, I had discovered that my husband had been cheating on me for 3 years, that my daughter-in-law was stealing from her own children, that my son had been lying about loans, and that my inheritance was worth a fortune. What guarantee do I have that this plan will work? None, Jackson admitted. But Mrs. Vance, after a year of investigating your family, I can tell you with certainty that greed always wins over prudence. If they think they are about to gain control over several $1,000,000, they will show their true colors. And if they don't? What if they genuinely just want to help me? Jackson looked at me with compassion. Ma'am, in that case, we would have discovered that your family is better than the evidence suggests, but you and I both know that's not a very realistic possibility. He was right. After what I'd heard yesterday, after all the lies I had just uncovered, I knew exactly what was going to happen. Okay, I finally said, let's do it. Are you sure? I'm sure. But detective, I want you to record everything they say, everything they do. I want complete evidence of who they really are. Of course. Your uncle already paid for professional recording equipment. Everything will be documented. When I left the bistro, I felt like a completely different person. I was no longer Carol Vance, the obedient wife. I was Carol Vance, the woman who had finally decided to find out what she was made of, and she was about to discover exactly how strong she could be when she had all the information on her side. The drive back home was the strangest of my life. Every stoplight, every familiar corner seemed different, as if I were viewing my own city through a stranger's eyes. Jackson had given me a small recording device, the size of a lapel pin, and explained how to activate it discreetly. Just press here when you want to start recording, he had said. The battery lasts 12 continuous hours. He had also given me a new perspective on the coming days. Remember, Mrs. Vance, you have all the information. They don't know that you know anything. That is your advantage. When I got home, Edward was in the living room watching television, but I could tell he had been worried. He immediately stood up when he heard me come in. Carol, where were you? I called you several times. Sorry, I had my phone on silent, I lied, showing him the device. The errands took longer than expected. What kind of errands? Bank stuff, some pending paperwork I'd been putting off. You know, that boring stuff you always leave until later. Edward studied me carefully. Are you okay? You look different. Different how? I don't know, more alert. Alert, what a precise word. After 30 years of being half asleep, I was finally wide awake. It must be because I finally cleared up some loose ends, I said, sitting on the sofa. Edward, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday. His eyes lit up. About the inheritance? Yes. You're right about how complicated all this can be. I think I do need professional help. Of course, my love, that's the right decision. I discreetly activated the recording device. I was thinking maybe we could sign that power of attorney you mentioned. But first, I'd like to have a small family celebration. What do you say? A celebration? Well, regardless of the value, it's the biggest inheritance our family has ever received. I thought we could all go together to see the beach house this weekend, spend some time as a family, and then sign the paper on Monday. Edward's face transformed. For a moment, the whole mask of concern disappeared, and I could see pure greed in his eyes. That sounds like an excellent idea, Carol. Should we call David and Monica? I already called them. They're excited. David says the kids have never been to a beach house. Perfect. Edward kissed my forehead, but I could now feel the falseness in every gesture. It's going to be a wonderful weekend. And Carol? Yes. I'm very proud of you for making the mature decision about this. I know it's not easy to trust others with something so personal. I trust you, I lied, as the device recorded every word. The next 2 days were a surreal play. Edward was more attentive to me than he had been in years. He brought me flowers, cooked dinner, and even massaged my feet while we watched television. You know, he told me the night before the trip, I think this inheritance is going to be very good for us. Not just for the money, but because it's giving us a chance to work together as a team. As a team. If only he knew I already knew all the players on the opposing team. David and Monica arrived Friday morning with the children and enough luggage for a month instead of a weekend. Monica even brought me a gift, a bottle of expensive wine. To celebrate your good fortune, she said with this smile I could now see was completely fake. That's very generous, I replied, especially considering how tight you must be on money. Monica tensed slightly. Why do you say that? Well, with David building his business and you two with young children, I imagine every dollar counts. We're fine, she said quickly. David has had some really good clients lately. Really good clients. Or loans from Robert that she believed came from special bank contacts. I'm glad to hear that, I said, because I know how difficult the first years can be when you're building something of your own. During the drive to Naples, I listened to conversations that took on a completely different meaning now that I knew the truth. Mom, David said from the driver's seat, I never thought Uncle Robert had so much money saved up. Me neither, I responded honestly. Your uncle was always very private about his finances. The good thing, Monica added from the passenger seat, is that now you have family who can help you navigate all the legal complications. Yes, I agreed. It's comforting to know I have people I can trust. Edward, who was sitting in the back with me, took my hand and squeezed it. You'll always have our support, Carol. Always. What an interesting word coming from a man who had been cheating on me for 3 years. Do you have any idea how much it might all be worth? David asked. The lawyer said he would have a more precise appraisal next week, I lied. But based on the condo addresses, they seem to be in decent areas. And the beach house? Well, we'll see it in a few hours, I said. Although the lawyer warned me that beach properties can be deceiving. Sometimes they look beautiful, but they have expensive structural problems. I saw Edward and Monica exchange a look in the rearview mirror. They were clearly hoping the house would be a disappointment, something that would justify selling it quickly. When we arrived in Naples and they saw the house for the first time, the expression on their faces was unforgettable. It was like watching children who had just discovered the existence of Santa Claus. The house was spectacular. 2 stories, direct ocean view, private garden, enormous terrace. It was obviously a luxury property, not the small cottage they had imagined. Carol, Edward said, standing on the terrace with his mouth open, this house is incredible. Yes, Monica added, trying not to look too excited. It's definitely not the financial burden you thought. No, I agreed. It's definitely not that. The children ran towards the beach, followed by David. Edward and Monica stayed with me, clearly trying to process the value of what they were seeing. Carol, Monica finally said, I think we need to reconsider the plan for handling this inheritance. In what way? Well, Edward took control of the conversation. A property like this requires professional management, insurance, taxes, maintenance, potential investment opportunities. Investment opportunities? This house could generate incredible income as a vacation rental, Monica explained, but it needs someone who understands the tourism market. Of course, I said, and you understand the tourism market? Well, Edward cleared his throat. We could hire experts, professional administrators. Professional administrators who would answer to Edward, not me. Sounds complicated, I observed. It is complicated, Monica confirmed. That's why it's so important that you have help from family you can trust. Family you can trust? The words were right, but knowing what I knew about their debts, their lies, their thefts, they sounded like a cruel joke. That night, I prepared a special dinner with all my family's favorite ingredients. I wanted this last meal as a unified family to be memorable. During the meal, David raised his glass. A toast, he announced, to Carol for her generosity in sharing this blessing with us, and for the prosperous future we are going to build together. To family, they all repeated. To family, I replied, knowing that tomorrow that word would mean something completely different for all of us. I got up before dawn and walked to the beach. I needed a moment of clarity before what came next. The waves gently rolled onto the shore, and for the first time in days, I felt completely at peace. It wasn't the peace of ignorance I had before. It was the peace of someone who finally had all the information and was ready to act. When I returned to the house, everyone was already awake. The children were playing on the terrace, David was making coffee, and Edward and Monica were in the dining room with documents spread across the table. Good morning, I said cheerfully. Already working? Just reviewing some papers, Edward said quickly, collecting the documents. Getting ready for tomorrow. What kind of papers? Monica replied. Edward brought some forms to expedite the power of attorney transfer process, so you don't have to worry about technical details. Forms I hadn't seen, prepared without my knowledge. Of course. How thoughtful. Can I see exactly what it says? I asked. Of course. Edward handed me the papers, but I could see nervousness in his eyes. The documents were much more extensive than necessary for a simple power of attorney. There were clauses about property sales, title transfers, and authorization to make financial decisions without prior consultation. This seems very thorough, I observed. It's to protect you, Monica quickly explained, to ensure that any decisions we need to make for you are legally covered. Any decisions they needed to make for me. As if I were incompetent to make my own decisions. I see, I said, pretending to study the documents. Although there are some parts I don't completely understand. Which parts? Edward asked, trying to sound casual. This section about sales authorization, I pointed to a specific paragraph. Does this mean you could sell the properties without asking me? Only in cases where it would be financially beneficial, Edward said. For example, if a really good offer came in, or if there were tax issues that required immediate action. What kind of tax issues? Monica intervened. Carol, these things can change very quickly. Sometimes it's better to have the flexibility to act fast than to lose opportunities due to bureaucracy. Flexibility to act fast, or flexibility to sell my properties before I realized what was happening. I guess you're right, I said, pretending to put the documents down. After all, you understand these things better than I do. I watched them relax, thinking they had won. Exactly, Edward said. And Carol, I want you to know that everything we do will be with your well-being in mind. I know, I lied. I completely trust you. Then, Monica said, pulling out a pen, do you want to sign now to get all the paperwork over with and be able to enjoy the rest of the weekend without worries? There it was, the moment of truth. They couldn't even wait until Monday, as we had originally agreed. Well, I said slowly, I suppose there's no reason to wait. I took the pen in my hands, held it over the document, and then stopped. You know what? I said, looking up. Before I sign, I think I'd like to hear honestly what you plan to do with the properties. What do you mean? David asked, who had been quiet throughout the conversation. Well, it's my inheritance. It's natural that I want to know the specific plans. Edward and Monica exchanged a quick glance. Of course, Edward said. What we're thinking is maximizing the value of the investments. Does that mean selling? Possibly, Monica admitted, depending on the offers we receive. And then we could reinvest in something more liquid, easier to manage, Edward explained. Like what? High-yield savings accounts, some conservative bonds, things that generate stable income without the complications of being a landlord. Savings accounts and bonds that would be under Edward's control. And this house? This house is beautiful, Monica said, but the maintenance of a beach property can be very costly. Hurricanes, sea salt, break-ins when it's vacant. So you recommend selling it too? Not necessarily selling it, Edward said, but maybe renting it long-term to a responsible family. That would generate income without the maintenance hassles. Renting it long-term so I could never use it. I see, I said. So basically the plan is to convert my entire inheritance into cash under your management. Under professional management, Monica corrected. For your benefit. Of course, I said, setting the pen on the table. For my benefit. I got up and walked toward the window overlooking the ocean. The recording device had captured every word, every admission of their plans. You know what I find interesting? I said without turning around. What? Edward asked. That in this entire conversation about maximizing the value of my properties, no one has mentioned that I might want to keep them. Well, Monica quickly said, of course it's your decision. We're just offering options. And if my option was to keep the properties, live off the rent, and use this house as my personal retirement spot? There was an uncomfortable silence. Of course you could do that, Edward finally said. But it would be a lot of work for you, managing tenants, maintaining properties, traveling here regularly. It sounds like you don't believe I'm capable of managing my own inheritance, I observed, turning to face them. It's not that, David protested. It's just that we want to ensure you don't have unnecessary stress. Unnecessary stress? Like the stress of knowing my husband is cheating on me, my daughter-in-law is stealing from her children, and my son has been lying for years. And what about you? I asked. What would your compensation be for all this professional management? Another awkward silence. Carol, Edward finally said, we're family. We don't expect compensation. No? Well, Monica added, maybe some reimbursement for administrative expenses, but only what's necessary to cover costs. Administrative expenses. What an elegant way to say they plan to pay themselves with my money. I see, I said, walking back to the table. So basically, you would manage my money, make decisions about my properties, receive compensation for doing so, and I would receive... What exactly? You would receive financial security, Edward said, without the hassle of managing everything yourself. Financial security, I repeated slowly, under the administration of my loving family. Exactly, Monica smiled. I picked up the pen again and held it over the document. Well, I said, before signing this, I think there are a few things you should know about me. What kind of things? David asked. I smiled. That smile I had learned from Robert. The smile of someone who is finally about to show all their cards. Things like the fact that I know exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it and who you really are. The color drained from Edward's and Monica's faces. Carol, Edward said slowly, I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? I pulled out my phone and connected it to the house sound system because I have some recordings I think we all should hear. The silence in the room was so dense you could cut it with a knife. I pressed play on my phone, and Edward's voice filled the house. Carol has always been too trusting for her own good. We'll tell her it's for tax reasons, that we need to act fast to avoid high inheritance taxes. Then Monica's voice. Your mother-in-law isn't stupid, but she doesn't understand complex finances. And finally, Edward's reply. Then we'll have to be more convincing. Ultimately, it's for the whole family's benefit. I stopped the recording and looked at their faces. Edward was pale as paper. Monica was visibly trembling. David looked at all of us as if he had walked into a movie halfway through. Would someone like to explain to me, I said in a dangerously calm voice, what exactly you were talking about in my kitchen 3 days ago? The silence stretched for what seemed like an eternity. Mom, David finally said, his voice confused, I don't understand what's going on here. What's going on, I replied, is that your father and your wife have been planning to manage my inheritance without my true consent. That's not true, Edward exploded, finally regaining his voice. Carol, you don't understand the context of that conversation. I don't understand the context. I pulled out my purse and began pulling out documents. Perfect, explain it to me. First, I pulled out the photographs of Edward with Patty. Who is this woman, Edward? David stepped closer to see the photos, and I watched his face transition from confusion to shock to horror. Dad, his voice was barely a whisper. Who is she? David, I can explain. Her name is Patty Reynolds, I said before Edward could invent another lie. Your father has been seeing her for the last 3 years. She thinks he has a lot more money than he really does, and she's pressuring him to divorce me. 3 years? David looked at me with horror. Mom, Dad has been... Yes, I replied simply. And when my inheritance appeared, he saw the perfect opportunity to solve all his problems at once. Carol, please. Edward finally found his voice. Let me explain. No, I said firmly. You've had years to explain. Now it's my turn to talk. I pulled out Robert's loan documents. David, do you want to tell Monica where the $75,000 you borrowed over the last few years actually came from? David went white. How do you know? $75,000? Monica turned to her husband. What is she talking about? David, I told you it was special bank contacts. It wasn't bank contacts, I said. It was my Uncle Robert. Money he lent directly, with signed documents, on the condition that I never found out. Why didn't you tell me the truth? Monica yelled at David. Because I knew you'd feel bad taking money from family, David replied miserably. Feel bad? Monica's voice went up an octave. When I've been... She stopped abruptly, realizing what she was about to admit. When you've been what, Monica? I asked softly. Monica slumped into a chair, burying her face in her hands. Monica, I said, pulling out the college account statements, do you want to tell David about the $60,000 you've withdrawn from Matthew's and Sophia's educational accounts? David froze. What? The children's college accounts are empty, I explained. All the money I've been depositing for years is gone. Monica has been gradually withdrawing it to cover expenses you couldn't afford. Is that true? David turned to Monica with an expression I had never seen on him. Monica started crying. I was going to replace it. I thought we could fix it when things got better. With what money? David yelled. With more loans I didn't know I was taking out? With your mother's inheritance? Monica screamed back. I thought we'd finally have enough money to fix everything. There it was, the full admission that they had been counting on my inheritance to solve their financial problems. So, I said, walking towards the window, let me make sure I understand the complete situation. I turned back to them. Edward, you've been cheating on me for 3 years. You've been lying to your mistress about our finances, and you've been planning to use my inheritance to maintain your lies. Edward didn't answer. He just nodded miserably. David, you knew the money came from Robert, but you lied to your wife about the source, inadvertently enabling her to make irresponsible financial decisions. Yes, David admitted, his voice broken. And Monica, you've been stealing your own children's educational future to buy things you didn't need, hoping my inheritance would cover your bad decisions. It wasn't stealing, Monica protested weakly. I have legal power of attorney. Power of attorney for educational emergencies, I interrupted, not for shoes and clothes. Shoes and clothes? David looked at his wife in disbelief. You spent our children's education on shoes. Not just shoes, Monica yelled defensively. Clothes for the kids, things for the house, treatments I needed. Treatments you needed? I repeated. Like what? Dermatologist, cosmetic dentist, therapeutic massages, Monica mumbled. You spent $60,000 of your children's future on beauty treatments, I said, letting the reality of those words sink in. David collapsed into a chair, clearly overwhelmed by everything he was discovering. And now what? He finally asked. What are you going to do with all this information? I walked to the table where the power of attorney documents lay. I picked them up and slowly tore them in half. What I'm going to do, I said as the pieces floated to the floor, is something I should have done years ago. What? Edward asked. I'm going to start living my life for myself, not for a family that sees my generosity as weakness and my trust as stupidity. Mom, David stood up. We're not all the same. I made mistakes, but I didn't know. David, I interrupted gently. You knew exactly where the money came from. You chose to lie about it. That was your decision. And that means it means all of you are going to have to decide what kind of people you want to be from now on. Because the Carol who signed checks without asking questions no longer exists. I walked toward the terrace door. Where are you going? Edward asked. For a walk on my beach, I replied. In my house, which is part of my inheritance, and which I will manage exactly as I decide. Carol, wait. Edward stood up. Can we talk about this? Can we fix? No, I said firmly. We are not going to fix anything. You are going to decide if you want to take responsibility for your actions, and I am going to decide if I can ever trust you again. And if we can't earn your trust back? Monica asked in a small voice. I stopped at the door and turned back to them. Then you'll discover that the overly trusting woman you knew has learned to protect herself very well. I walked out onto the terrace, leaving them with the weight of their lies and the reality that Carol Vance was no longer the easy victim they had been exploiting for years. Because I had finally understood the most important lesson Robert had left me: respect is earned, not given away. I walked on the beach for an hour, letting the sound of the waves calm my mind after the confrontation. When I returned to the house, I found a very different scene than the one I had left. David was sitting alone on the terrace, his head in his hands. The children were playing on the beach, seemingly oblivious to the family drama that had just exploded. Edward and Monica were nowhere in sight. "Where are they?" I asked, sitting down in the chair next to my son. "Monica's upstairs packing. Dad is in the living room making phone calls." "Calls to whom?" "I don't know." David looked up at me. His eyes were red. "Mom, I didn't know. About Dad and that woman, about what Monica was doing with the kids' accounts, I swear I didn't know." "But you did know about Robert's loans." "Yes," he admitted. "But Dad told me it was better not to involve you, that you'd worry too much, that you'd try to pay everything off immediately." And he was right. I would have paid everything off immediately. Why is that wrong? I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the ocean. "It's not wrong, David, but your father knew I would do that because he knew I wouldn't ask about his own loans. He knew I would pay your debt, but not his." David processed this in silence. "What's going to happen now?" he finally asked. "That depends on you," I replied. "How willing you are to truly change. If you want to change, if you try to fix all this, then you'll have to start by being completely honest about everything. No more secrets, no more lies to protect me. And Dad, your father has very difficult decisions to make and consequences to face." As if I had summoned him with my words, Edward appeared on the terrace. He looked devastated, but there was also something different in his expression, a kind of defeat I had never seen before. "Carol," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I just finished calling Patty. And I told her the truth about our real finances, about the inheritance, about everything. And what did she say? To lose her number, that she never wanted to hear from me again. I was silent, not because I felt sorry for him, but because I didn't know what I was supposed to feel. "And now what?" I asked. "Now nothing," he said, sitting heavily in another chair. "Carol, I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but you're going to ask me anyway." "No," he surprised me. "Actually, I'm sorry to be—" He paused. "No, I just wanted to tell you that you're right. About everything. I've been a coward and a liar, and you've been married to a stranger for years without knowing it." It was the first time in decades Edward had said something that sounded completely honest. "What do you want me to do with that information?" I asked. "Nothing," he said. "I just wanted you to know, and I wanted to apologize, even though I know apologies don't fix anything." David watched us as if he were seeing two strangers. "Are you going to divorce?" he finally asked. Edward and I looked at each other. It was a good question. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I need time to think." "I understand," Edward said. "And Carol, about the inheritance, about the power of attorney, about all that, what about it?" "It was a terrible idea, desperate and terrible. I don't want any of your inheritance. It's yours, and you should do exactly what you want with it. Even if that means you never see a dime. Even if that means that." Monica appeared on the terrace with a suitcase in her hand and eyes swollen from crying. "Are we leaving now?" she asked in a small voice. "Monica," I said before anyone else could respond, "sit down. We need to talk." Monica sat down nervously on the edge of a chair. "Do you understand the gravity of what you did?" I asked her. "Yes," she whispered. "Do you understand that you stole your own children's educational future?" "Yes." "And do you understand that your participation in the plan to manage my inheritance was basically a conspiracy to steal from me?" I didn't think of it that way at the time." "How did you think of it?" Monica took her time to respond. "I thought it was an opportunity to solve all our problems without anyone getting hurt." "Without anyone getting hurt?" I repeated. "Including me?" "I thought you'd be better off if you didn't have to worry about managing complicated properties." "What you really thought," I said, "is that I was dumb enough to sign papers without understanding what they meant." Monica didn't respond, but she didn't deny it either. What do you want to happen now? I asked her. I want to fix things, she said quickly. I want to replace the money in the children's accounts. I want to compensate you for everything. With what money? David asked. Monica, we're in debt up to our necks. I'll get a job, Monica said, a full-time job, and I'll stop spending on unnecessary things. You mean you'll stop spending money we don't have on things you don't need? Yes. It was a start, I supposed. Okay, I finally said. Here are my conditions. They all looked at me attentively. Edward, we are separating. I don't know if it will be temporary or permanent, but I need space to decide if there is anything to save from 30 years of marriage. Edward nodded sadly. David, you are going to pay me $2,000 a month until your $75,000 debt is complete. It's an amount you can manage without ruining your family. Okay, David said immediately. Monica, you are going to get a full-time job, and every dollar you earn will go directly into replenishing Matthew's and Sophia's college accounts. I understand, Monica said, and all of you are going to go to therapy, family and individual, because there are clearly deeper problems here than just money. And if we don't want to accept those conditions, Edward asked. I pulled out my phone. Then I share all the recordings I have on social media. I send the photos of your affair to all your insurance clients, and I make sure the whole town knows exactly what kind of people you are. That would ruin our reputations, Monica said. Yes, I agreed, completely. And if we accept? David asked. If you accept, I keep all this private. Your secrets stay in the family. And maybe, just maybe, we can rebuild some kind of relationship based on honesty. The four of us were silent for a moment, listening to the sound of the waves and the voices of the children playing on the beach. I accept, David finally said. Me too, Monica said. Edward? I asked. I accept, he said. But Carol, is there any chance that one day you can forgive me? I looked at him, this man with whom I had shared 30 years of my life, and I realized that I honestly didn't know the answer to that question. I don't know, I finally said. But for the first time in years, that uncertainty doesn't scare me. Because I had learned something important in the last few days. Being Carol Vance, without depending on anyone else, was much better than being the Carol Vance I had been before. 3 months later, I was sitting in the office of attorney Patricia Henderson, my new lawyer, signing the final papers for my legal separation from Edward. It wasn't a divorce yet, but it was an important step toward complete independence. Are you sure you don't want to request alimony? The attorney asked me. Completely sure, I replied. I don't want anything from him except my freedom. The last 3 months had been the most difficult and yet the most liberating of my life. Edward had moved into a small apartment and was struggling to rebuild his business after losing several major clients. Apparently, the lies about his financial situation had affected more than just his personal life. David had started paying me the $2,000 a month religiously, and surprisingly, his business had started to improve. I think finally being free of the pressure to maintain lies had allowed him to focus on the real work. Monica had gotten a job at a local boutique. And although she hated every minute at first, last week she had told me she got her first raise. More importantly, she had already deposited $15,000 into the children's new college accounts. But the most dramatic change had been in myself. Have you thought about what you want to do with the properties in the long term? The attorney asked me. Yes, I smiled. I'm going to keep the condos as rental investments. The monthly income allows me to live comfortably without depending on anyone. And the beach house? That's my gift to myself. I spend weekends there, sometimes whole weeks. It's my refuge. Alone, I confirmed, and it's perfect. After the appointment with the lawyer, I drove to David's house. I had promised to take the children to the park, and it was one of the few family routines I had decided to maintain. When I arrived, Monica was in the kitchen preparing the children's snack. She looked different. Thinner, less made up, but strangely more real. Carol, she greeted me, and I noticed that for the first time in years she had called me by my name, instead of avoiding calling me anything at all. How are you? Very well, I replied honestly. And you? How's work going? Better than I expected, she admitted. At first I thought I'd die of boredom, but it turns out I'm good at sales. My boss says I have the potential to manage my own section. I'm delighted to hear that. Really? Of course. I always thought you had more capabilities than you used. It was true. For years, I had observed how Monica was smart and persuasive when she wanted something, but she had used those skills mainly to manipulate family situations. Seeing her channel them into something productive was refreshing. Carol, she said nervously, wiping the counter, I wanted to thank you. For what? For not destroying our lives when you easily could have. I didn't have to destroy your lives. I said I just needed you to face the consequences of your decisions. Is that very different? Very different. Destroying would have been revenge. This is justice. David appeared in the kitchen with Matthew and Sophia, both excited to see me. Grandma Carol! Sophia ran into my arms. Are we going to the park with the big swings? Of course, my love. I picked her up. Matthew, are you ready? Yes, but first I want to show you something. Matthew ran to his room and returned with a savings booklet. Mom helped me open an account. I'm saving for college. I was speechless for a moment. Monica had taken the devastation of the college accounts and turned it into a lesson in financial responsibility for her children. Seriously? I looked at Monica. I explained to them that I made mistakes with their education money and that we all had to work together to fix those things, she said. Matthew wanted to start his own account to help. $120 already, Matthew announced proudly. That's a fortune, I told him, genuinely impressed. At the park, while the children played, David and I sat on a bench watching them. How's Dad? He asked me. I don't know, I admitted. We only talk about legal matters. Have you talked to him? Yes, he's different, David replied immediately. More present when he's with us. He asks questions about our lives instead of just talking about his problems. He's been helping me with the business, but as a consultant, not as someone trying to take control. And with the children? He's more patient, less distracted. Matthew told me last week that he likes spending time with Dad Edward more now because he actually listens. Do you think he's really changed? David took his time to answer. I think he is changing. Whether it will be permanent, only time will tell. What would you do in my place? Honestly, Mom, I would do exactly what you're doing. I would take my time, live my own life, and let him prove with actions whether he has really changed. That night, back in my new downtown apartment, I had decided to rent one of my own condos instead of staying in the marital home. I reflected on how my life had changed. The apartment was small but perfect for one person. It had a view of a park, was close to everything I needed, and most importantly, it was entirely mine. My phone rang. It was a message from my neighbor, Mrs. Lopez. Carol, would you like to join me for the ballroom dance class tomorrow? My usual partner is sick. I smiled. I had wanted to take dance classes for years, but had always found excuses related to family responsibilities. I replied, I would love to. What time? The next day, while learning the basic steps of the tango with a patient instructor and a group of people my age who had decided to try something new, I realized something important. For years, I had defined my identity completely in relation to other people. Edward's wife, David's mother, Monica's mother-in-law, Matthew and Sophia's grandmother. But now, for the first time in decades, I was discovering who Carol Vance was as an individual. And I really liked what I was discovering. That night, I wrote in my diary, Dear Robert, today I learned to dance the tango. Tomorrow, I'm going to take a painting class. Next month, I'm traveling alone to Santa Fe. Thank you for giving me not just an inheritance, but the opportunity to inherit myself. 6 months after the confrontation in Naples, I received a call I wasn't expecting. It was Edward. Carol. His voice sounded different, more humble, more real. Could we talk? In person? About what? About us. About whether there's any chance of starting over. I had been expecting this call, but it still caught me off guard. Where do you want to meet? At the coffee shop where we used to go on Sundays? The one near the park? 2 days later, I found myself sitting across from the man I had been married to for 30 years, and I realized he looked like a stranger. Not physically, but emotionally. As if I were finally seeing the real Edward without all the masks he had worn for years. You look good, he said, and he sounded genuinely surprised. I feel good, I replied. And you? I'm learning about myself, about the decisions I made, about the damage I caused. Are you in therapy? Yes. individual and in a support group for men who have betrayed their partners. That surprised me. A support group? The therapist says I have problems with honesty and intimacy that go back years, that using lies to avoid confrontation became my normal way of handling any difficult situation. And what have you learned? Edward took his time to answer. I've learned that for years. I treated you like you were my mother instead of my wife. I expected you to solve my problems, care for my emotions, give me permission to make decisions. And when that didn't work, I looked for someone else to fill that role. It was the most honest assessment I had ever heard from him. And now I'm trying to learn to be a responsible adult for the first time in my life. How's that going? It's terrifying, he admitted, but also liberating. For the first time in years, I'm not living a lie. We were silent for a moment, drinking our coffee. Carol, he finally said, I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I know I messed everything up so completely that maybe you can never forgive me. But I was wondering if maybe we could try to be friends. Not spouses, not yet, maybe never, but friends. Why would you want that? Because for 30 years, you were the best part of me and I was too stupid to realize it. And because I'd like to get to know the Carol you've discovered these last few months. It was an unexpected request, but not unwelcome. What would that mean exactly, I asked. It would mean starting over, getting to know each other as the people we are now, not as the people we were during our marriage. No romantic expectations. No expectations of any kind, just friendship if possible. I considered it. The Edward sitting across from me seemed genuinely different from the man who had planned to steal my inheritance. But I also knew that people can change temporarily when they are desperate. What does your therapist say about this idea? I asked. He says it's premature, that I first need to work on myself for at least a full year before attempting any kind of relationship with someone I hurt so deeply. But you decided to ask me anyway. I decided to ask you because I wanted you to know that I am willing to work for as long as necessary if there's any chance you can eventually trust me again. And if I never decide that it's possible, then I accept that too, because after everything I did, you deserve to make that decision completely free of pressure. It was a more mature response than I had expected. Edward, I finally said, I appreciate that you are working on yourself, I really do. But I need more time to decide if I want any kind of relationship with you in the future. Of course, I just wanted you to know that if you ever decide it's possible, I'll be here, doing the work, trying to become someone who deserves your friendship. After he left, I stayed at the coffee shop for another hour, processing the conversation. The Edward who had just spoken to me was different from the man I had known for 30 years. More vulnerable, more honest, more aware of his flaws, but I also knew that words were easy. True change would be demonstrated with time and consistent actions. That night, I called David. How has your father really been? I asked him. Different, David replied immediately. More present when he's with us. He asks questions about our lives instead of just talking about his problems. He's been helping me with the business, but as a consultant, not as someone trying to take control. And with the children? He's more patient, less distracted. Matthew told me last week that he likes spending time with Dad Edward now because he actually listens. Do you think he's really changed? David took his time to answer. I think he is changing. Whether it will be permanent, only time will tell. What would you do in my place? Honestly, Mom, I would do exactly what you're doing. I would take my time, live my own life, and let him prove with actions if he has really changed. That night, I wrote in my diary, Edward wants to be friends. He says he's been in therapy, that he's working on his problems. He says he respects my decision if I never want to try. It's the most mature I've ever heard him. But I've also learned that I am perfectly happy alone. If I ever decide to attempt a friendship with him, it will be because I want to, not because I need to. And that difference changes everything. Because that was the most important lesson I had learned in the last few months. The difference between wanting something and needing it. For years, I had needed Edward. I had needed my family to need me. I had needed to be indispensable to others. Now, I simply wanted the things that made me happy. And if other people wanted to be part of that happiness, they had to earn that privilege. I was no longer willing to settle for less. A year after the confrontation in Naples, I was sitting on the terrace of my beach house, watching the sunset and reflecting on everything that had changed in my life. I had finished writing a book. Yes, a book. It's never too late. How I discovered who I really was at 54. A small publisher had expressed interest after I published some chapters on a blog I had started as personal therapy. My phone vibrated with a message from David. Mom, are you still available for dinner tomorrow? Monica wants to show you something special. Over the last year, my relationship with David and Monica had evolved into something much healthier. David had paid his debt religiously and made the final payment last month. Monica had not only replaced all the money in the college accounts, but had been promoted to supervisor at the boutique. More importantly, they had learned to communicate honestly with each other and even with me. There were no longer any family secrets being hidden from me to protect me. Edward had kept his word about working on himself. Over the last year, he had gone to therapy religiously. He had gotten sober. Apparently, he had developed a drinking problem that I hadn't even noticed. And he had slowly rebuilt his business based on honesty rather than exaggerated promises. 3 months ago, I had agreed to see him once a month for coffee, not as ex-spouses trying to reconcile, but as two people who had shared a life and were learning to know each other as new individuals. It was strangely pleasant. The Edward that I was getting to know now was someone I would have liked as a person even if we had never been married. My phone rang. It was a video call from Matthew. Grandma Carol, his face filled the screen. Guess how much I have saved now. How much, my love? $1,500. Mom says if I keep this up, by the time I finish elementary school, I'll have enough to help with my college. I'm so proud of you, I told him. And I meant it. Seeing my grandchildren learn financial responsibility at such a young age was one of the unexpected positives of this whole situation. And guess what else? Matthew continued excitedly. Dad Edward is teaching me how to budget. He says it's important to know exactly how much money comes in and how much goes out. Dad Edward teaching budgeting? Who would have imagined? And Sophia? Sophia is saving up to buy Mom a gift for her work promotion. She already has 200 dice load. After ending the call, I walked along the beach as the sun finished setting. This house had become my sanctuary, the place where I came to write, to think, to simply be Carol Vance without any additional role. I had made several friends in the town, other women my age who had also decided that the second half of their lives was going to be different from the first. We had dinner together. We went to yoga classes on the beach. We organized book clubs. One of them, Rose, was a widow whose adult children had tried to convince her to sell her house and move in with one of them. I told him I loved them very much, she had told me last week, but I didn't raise children to become their responsibility. I raised them to be independent, and I deserve to be independent too. Rose had become one of my best friends, mainly because she understood the difference between being alone and being lonely. My phone vibrated again. A message from a larger publisher who had read my blog. Mrs. Vance, we would like to discuss the possibility of publishing your book with us and perhaps developing a series on personal reinvention after 50. A book series. At 54, I was apparently starting a career as a writer. The next day, I drove back to the city for dinner with David and Monica. When I arrived at their house, there was a special decoration in the dining room. What are you celebrating? I asked. 2 things, Monica said, smiling more genuinely than I had ever seen her. First, I received an offer to manage my own boutique at the new Commerce Center. Monica, that's fantastic. And second, David added, we finished paying off all our credit card debt. All of it? All of it, Monica confirmed. For the first time in years, we don't owe anyone money except the mortgage on the house. And how does that feel? Terrifying, David admitted, but also liberating. We no longer have to lie about our finances because they are finally under control. During dinner, the children told me about their plans for the summer. Matthew wanted to take swimming lessons. Sophia had developed an interest in painting. Can we come visit you at the beach house? Sophia asked. Of course. How about you plan to spend a week with me during summer vacation? A whole week? Matthew's eyes lit up. A whole week. You can learn to fish, explore the tide pools, maybe take some art classes in town. After dinner, while the children played in the yard, Monica and I were left alone in the kitchen. Carol, she said, washing the dishes, I never properly thanked you. For what? for not destroying us when you could have, for giving us the opportunity to become better people. I didn't have to destroy you, I said. I just needed you to take responsibility for your decisions. You know what the best part of all this has been? What? That for the first time in my adult life, I feel proud of who I am. Not because of what I buy, not because of how I look, but because of what I've achieved with my own work. It was the most significant personal growth I had seen in Monica since I met her. And David? David is calmer, less stressed. He says it's because he no longer has to remember what lies he told whom. That night, back in my city apartment, I received an unexpected call. Carol, it's Edward. I know it wasn't our scheduled date to talk, but I wanted to tell you something. What happened? Patty contacted me. Patty, his ex-mistress. I hadn't heard that name in months. What did she want? She wanted to know if things had changed between us, if I was available again. And what did you tell her? I told her no, that I was working on becoming a better person, and that didn't include going back to relationships that were based on lies. How did that feel to say? Genuine, liberating, he said. And I could hear the smile in his voice. For the first time in years, I chose honesty instead of the easy way out. I'm glad to hear that. Carol, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you happy? Truly happy. I considered it seriously before answering. Yes, Edward, I am happier than I have been in decades. I'm glad to hear that, he said, and he sounded genuine. And you deserve it. After hanging up, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, looking at the city lights. In a year and a half, I had gone from being a woman who signed checks without asking questions to being a woman who had written a book, who managed her own investments, who had plans to travel to Europe next year. Carol Vance at 54 was a completely different person from Carol Vance at 52. And the most incredible thing was that I knew this was only the initial version, that I had decades ahead to continue discovering what else I was capable of. My phone vibrated with one last message for the day. It was from David. Mom, thanks for teaching us that it's never too late to change. We love you. I smiled, put away my phone, and prepared for another day of living exactly the life I had chosen for myself. Because that was the final lesson I had learned, that the best revenge against those who underestimate you is not to destroy them. It is to become so prosperous and happy that their opinions of you become completely irrelevant. And Carol Vance had achieved exactly that. Clee.